Hi, I'm Joseph Crudup. Welcome to my storybook. Today I'm going to read this book called Jemison. Jemison, a Space Biography. I hope you enjoyed this book as much as you did. And I'm going to read it right now. Let's begin, please. Chapter 1. Climb to the Stars. In the early morning hours of September 12, 1992, 7 astronauts were transported to the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It was an awesome sight to see the space shuttle elevator looming behind the building. Attaching to the shuttle, the huge orange extra fuel tank and two Solar rocket boosters were sent to lift innovator into that space. Dr. May Carl Jemison and her crewmates were military figures next to the 30-story high space shuttle. On this day, Jemison finally had her chance to fulfill her dream of traveling into space. The astronauts entered an elevator that took them up to 374-foot scaffold to the shuttle Crudup. When the invasion stopped, the astronauts walked onto the access on an internal room at the end of the walkway. The walkway was attached to the space shuttle's heads. Taking down analysis then helped the astronauts put on their helmets and other necessary gear and checking their earphones and communication systems. Then the astronauts crawled through a round hatch into the shuttle and was strapping them into their seats. Since then, noise of the shuttle pointed upward. The astronauts were sitting on their backs, with their feet above their heads. They were waiting for the next step. The STS-47 mission was an important one for science and history. Jemison was about to become the first African American woman to travel into space. In a magazine article, she once said she was inspired to apply to NASA after the first African American, Cola Gordon S. Beaufort Jr., traveling into space on August 30th, 1983. She was also inspired by Sally Ride, the first American woman to travel aboard a space shuttle. Dr. Jameson listened to the final seconds of the countdown as as she sat aboard Innovator, the newest addition to the space shuttle fleet. 6, 5, 4. The main engine started with a thunderous roar. The shuttle began to vibrate from the powerful burst of energy given off by the engines. 3, 2, 1. A dream of flying into space was becoming reality. 0. The shuttle squirreled upwards, and the crew members were pinning back into their seats for the engine's thrust. The Solar rocket's boosters were a mass of power as they propelled the shuttle off the ground and on its way towards the stars. About 2 minutes into the flight, the Solar rocket boosters separated from the shuttles in a glowing white light and propelled into the ocean to be recorded for release. The extra fuel tank was still attached to the shuttle. It continued to sip in tons of fuel every second to the shuttle's rocket engines. Sending the astronauts farther into the sky, faster and faster innovator speed toward space. About 8.5 minutes into the flight, the empties into a fuel tank separated from the shuttle. It broke up and buried as it retained in Earth's atmosphere. It was the only major part of the shuttle that would not be released. The main engine shut off and the innovator crew began to experience weightlessness or zero gravity. Their bodies no longer felt heavy, and the astronauts were able to float in midair. Any objects that were not secure, such as books, pencils, and cups, were also floating. Invader began its first orbit, which would take 90 minutes to complete. Once in orbit, the shuttle grew quiet. Although the shuttle was traveling around Earth at close to 18,000 miles per hour, or 5 miles per second, there were hardly any motor inside the vehicle. It was a smooth, peaceful ride. Main Jemison was now in space, traveling nearly 200 miles above Earth's surface. As she began this exciting journey, Jemison thought, "This is what I have wanted to do for a very long time." For the next 8 days, Dr. Ming Jemison, a science mason, specially, and her crewmates abandoned the Earth. This history flight was a major advancement for African American women at the age of 35. Jennifer Jameson was in space. Her interest in science and astronomy began much easier. Chapter 2. Included version. Baby Carl Jemison was born on October 17, 1956, in Astronaut, Alabama. Her father was Charlie Jemison, a carpenter and wolfer. Her mother was Dorothy Green Jemison, an elementary school teacher. She was walking into a family that already included a brother, Charles, and a sister, Ada. May was 3 years old when her parents moved their family to Chicago, Illinois, so that their children could have better education. From the early age, May expressed an interest in science and the mysterious of space. She was a good student and loved to read. She enjoyed reading books on astronomy as well as science factor. When she was 8 years old, May worked on a school science project called The Oils of Time. Her job was to explain how Earth began and about the different time periods with their prehistory of animals. When May was in the third grade, she became fascinated with the gaming superflights. May never actually said, "I want to be an astronaut." But the idea that someday she will fly into space was always in her mind. May was only 1 year old in 1958 when the National Astronauts and Space Administration (NASA) was established. Even if Jemison had been old enough to apply to NASA's space program, she would not have been considered a possible candidate because of the strict requirements at that time. Under order from President Dwight D. Eisenhower, astronauts chosen by NASA had to be selected from a list of military test pilots. This would eliminate anyone else, including women, at that time. Only white males were allowed to fly into combat. Therefore, there were no female military test pilots and thus no female astronauts. Although May had plenty of home support, it developed her early interest in science. There were some people who thought a career in science was not suitable for the African American girl. She remembers her kindergarten teacher asking her what she wanted to be when she grew up. When Min told her she wanted to be a scientist, the teacher asked, "Don't you mean a nurse?" In the summer of 1969, when Min was 12 years old, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Aaron Buzz Aldrin traveled to the moon on Apollo 11. May was so interested in this space flight that she read everything she could find on this mission. When May entered Chicago's Morgan Park High School in 1969, she still wanted a career in science. She had not yet chosen a particular field, though one day one of her classes visited a local university when she became interested in biomodernity and biomedical medical engineering. From that point on, May created opportunities for herself, with May needing to do a science fair project. She called a local hospital and asked for resource information on sickle cell anemia, a disease that affects African Americans. Since she was working in the hospital's lab each week, however, she did not focus on just one thing or buying herself or building herself in a one category. She had other interests including dancing, art, and economically. She belonged to her school's marble dance club and the cheerleading squad. In 1973, at the age of 16, May graduated from Morgan Park High School. After applying for various college scholarships, she won a National Achievement Scholarship. May chose to attend Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, where major was critical engineering. Jemison had done well in her high school science course. However, she found that in college she had to always prove herself worthy to be in the field of the cinema engineering. Traditionally, engineering had been known to attract males, not African American females. There were many times when Jemison had to work harder than others just to be recognized by her scientists and engineering professors. Jemison balancing her interest in science with other activities. She wanted to learn more about her own culture as well as other cultures. She decided to major in both African American studies and clinical engineering. Along the way, she learned how to speak Swahili, Japanese, and Russian. This served as a break from the different engineering classes. Jemison also found the time to participate in other school activities. Her interest in dance and theater led her to produce and choreograph college students' productions as well as perform in them. In internationally, she became the first female president of the Black Student Union. In 1977, at the age of 20, Jemison graduated from Stanford University with a double major. She had earned a Bachelor of Science degree in chemical engineering and a Bachelor of the Arts degree in African and African American Studies. With college behind her, Jemison was inducted into NASA's Space Shuttle program, which was now opening up for women and modeling degrees. A college friend acceded and told her about the new recyclement policy at NASA and how mission specialists were needed for the new space shuttles. Although the idea of becoming an astronaut was very exciting, Jemison decided that she was not ready to commit herself to this goal. She also did not meet some of the requirements. Instead, she followed a plan to study medicine. In 1981, Jemison graduated as a medical doctor from Cornell University Medical College in New York City. She then did an internship at the Los Angeles County University at Sutton, California Medicine Center. In July 1982, she went to work as a doctor in Los Angeles. Jemison was drawn Jemison was drawn to the idea of helping communities in developmental countries improve their health, social, and economic problems. She was only 23 years old when she volunteered her time and service to the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps is in the United States energy. The main purpose is to promote world peace and friendship. The agency trains American volunteers to perform social and humanitarian service overseas. Jemison was named American Orphan for Sierra Leone and liberated in West Africa. This assessment made her one of the longest doctors to work in Sierra Leone. In addition to the supervision of medical staff and public medical care, Jemison taught volunteer personally. She also wrote medical manuals and worked on resources projects for the hepatitis B vaccine. Jemison worked for the Peace Corps from January 1983 to July 1985. She has said of her experience in Africa, "I got much more out of what I had done that I got much more out of what I had done than the people I was supposed to be helping." At the end of her time with the Peace Corps, Jemison returned to the United States. Although she was working as a physical, Jemison has not forgotten her dream of one day going into space. She now had the basic qualifications to apply to NASA's astronaut training program. Yet, in order to improve her chances of acceptable, she took interdisciplinary night course in biomedical engineering at the University of California, Los Angeles. Chapter 3. Following a Dream. In 1972, Congress passed an amendment to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It stated that a federal agency could not discriminate on the basis of sex, race, religion, or national origin. Since NASA is a federal agency, it cannot legally refuse to accept women or minorities. NASA changes entry requirements to comply with the new ruling. In 1976, the agency began a major recruitment program aimed at finding new pilots and mission specialists, or non-pilots, for their new shuttle flights. On June 18, 1983, Shelley K. White became America's first woman astronaut to travel into space on board the Space Shuttle Jemison. And on October 1985, Jemison decided it was time for her to apply for admission to NASA's astronaut training program. Tragically, 3 months later, on January 28, 1986, the space shuttle Jemison explored several 73 seconds into its flight. This disaster interrupted the astronauts' selection progress. Jemison was saddened by the tragedy, which took the lives of 7 astronauts, including school teacher Crystal McAuffin. However, the incident did not change her mind about waiting to fly into space. While waiting for NASA to resume the shuttle program, Jemison continued her work as a physician. She stayed in good physical condition by dancing and doing abdominals. When NASA again beginning its satellite applications in October 1986, Jemison resumed her own. In February 1987, she was at work explaining a patient when she received a phone call from the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. She has passed the first phase of the selection process and was invited to fly to Johnson Space Center for medical exams and personal interviews. The medical testing was extensive. Jemison had to run on a treadmill to test her heart for mental stress and intubation. Tests were performed to determine her mental fitness. NASA needed to know if she could work as part of the team and if she was afraid of the dark and enclosed space. During a space emergency, she might have to stay inside a small survival bubble for several days until help arrived. These zipping up bars would then be dropped into the rescue shuttle. NASA needs to be sure astronauts can handle this type of stress after the test and interview. Jemison went back to California to wait for the final decision. In early June 1987, the long-awaited phone call came. Jemison learned that she was one of the only 15 astronauts applying to this case, chosen out of the 2,000 who had applied. In addition, she was the first African American woman who had sent into the astronaut candidate program. She was now on her way to Houston when she will begin her long training program. Main Jemison's dream of flying into space was getting closer and closer to becoming a reality. During the religious 1 year astronaut training course, Jemison trained for her job as a serious medicine specialist. She needed to learn how the space shuttle operated and how to perform the duties of other crew members. She knew the astronauts training program was going to be an extraordinary challenge, both mentally and physically. One of the things she had no control was her dislike of heights, especially if she wanted to fly into space. She had plenty of experiences dealing with this when she had to learn how to prepare from an airplane over land and water. There were also many hours spent in the classroom. Jemison studied subjects such as rocket potentialists, astronauts, and other analysts, meteorologists, and physicists. Although analog training was performed in land and water, survival exercise. This meant surviving in water for a long periods of time, or being able to spread 3 days in the wilderness, or with on a sleeping bag, knife, and some drying food rations. Although most of the astronauts' training was intense, one exercise that always seemed to lighten the astronauts' workday was a drill in wilderness in order for astronauts candidates to explain the wilderness before they ventured into space. The trainers flew in a space jet. The jet would make a steady upward climb and then swoop down rapidly. During this free fall, the astronauts would become breathless for about 30 seconds before the jet had to pull out of the dive. They would fly around the plane cabins like birds. One training exercise could handle many as 30 of these dives. Astronauts usually had extreme fun experiences free flying, but there is a drawback due to the rapid downward motion of the jets. Some astronauts experience boredom with sickness. Therefore, these jets have been nicknamed vomit comets. Another part of Jemison's training included flying a T-38 training jet, a two-seater with dual controls. Since Jemison was a mission specialist, she was in the rear seat and learned about innovative flight, planning, and communications. One of the most time consuming and demanding things an astronaut must do is spend many hours in a mission simulator. A mission simulator is a model of the space shuttle. Jemison and the other crew members had to fly this mock shuttle while learning what all the strategies, goals, and warning lights mean. The prototype liftoff, access, abandoning, reaching, and landing. In August 1988, when Jemison finished her year of intensive training, she was available for flight assignments. Her name was placed on a list of astronauts waiting to travel into space. When Jemison joined NASA, she had signed a contract that started she would work for NASA for several years because of all the time and training the agency would have investment in her. She knew that her wait to go on a flight could be as long as 5 years. Some astronauts had the opportunity to travel into more space into more than one, while others are glad to have flown just one time. In 1989, Jemison was assigned to the Space Shuttle Invader, which would carry out Space Lab J. This was a joint mission between the United States and Japan. Her job was to conduct life sciences experiments in Space Lab J, a research laboratory. The laboratory had work areas and instrument racks for conducting many experiments in space. Although the flight was not scheduled to take place until 1992, Jemison still has to begin advanced astronaut training. At the age of 33, Maine Jemison was at last close to her much dreaming of space flight. The little girl who had been fascinated with the skies and stars was now a woman who believed that space belonged to all of us. Chapter 4. Dr. Jemison's flight into space was made with 6 other astronauts. Dr. N. Jen Davis and her husband, Mark C. Lee, were on board. They were the first male couple to travel into space. The main 4 crew members were Dr. J. Abbott, Chris L. Brown, Jr., Robert L. Hoot, Gibson, and Dr. Morrow, one hailed Japan's first astronaut. Jemison and the other crew members were responsible for performing and monitoring over 40 experiments. Space Lab J had been stored in the Congo Bay Invader in the Montreal, climbing like capsule about the size of a small bus. Jemison and the other astronauts moved between the space lab and the crew cabin during an 8-foot tunnel. Some of the experiences that were conducted in J's Lab J investigating space-borne sickness, bone cell loss in space, cyberbiology, and biology, and human physiology. These tasks suited Jemison well, since she was also a physician. Jemison's job, one of the experiments, was to see whether frogs could grow normally from eggs that were fertilizing and enhancing gravity. She had to fertilize half of the frog eggs in a zero-gravity environment and the other half in a spinning centrifugal. The centrifugal exhibit, Earth's gallery, with all the tadpoles from both environments, the looking normal and healthy. Jemison was also co-investigator on experiences with bone cells. She studied with humans lose cells from their bones and why women lose more color. Uh, Then being the longer they stay in space, Jamison's resource in encounter loss will have to define how long people can safely remain in space without damage to their health. Most astronauts will agree that a fun part of being in space is experiences weightlessness. It does not matter if you are standing on your head, eating upside down, or sleeping standing up. There is no up or down, no right or wrong side. An astronaut feels the same in any position. A walk across the shadows intentions can become a float walk which can easily turn into a somersault or a backflip. However, weightlessness has its hazards. Astronauts often experience puffy face and science's congregation, dropping heads, failure, volume, volume, vision problems, and loss of appetite due to body fluids moving towards the head in zero gravity. These are symptoms of space sickness. Jemison investigated whether feedback and modern cleaning techniques could ease the discomfortable space sickness. She became the subject for the football feedback training instrument. She wore a body fitness shirt and with holes for the electrodes and hairband with an instrument to measure head movement. She also wore a pinky ring that measures blood flow and skin temperature, and the wristwatch with a display so that she could keep track of her pulse and skin temperature. About that container and data record and batteries for all the equipment was placed around her wrist. Jemison kept a close watch on her vital signs. Usually, medicine is given to astronauts to prevent motion sickness. However, Jemison did not take medicine. Instead, she used method of biofeedback during the onset of motion sickness. For example, if she began having retaliatingly, talking, quick, swallow, breaths, she tried to calm her breathing. She tried to calm her breathing. She didn't carefully record her reactions. Doctors and scientists will later study their result to see if biofeedback work better than medicine in space for controlling moral sickness. Although Jamison's time in space was mostly spent on her work, there were also rest periods when she could just relax and enjoy her space flight. In space of peace, fell over her as she reflected on her trip into space. One of the things she enjoyed doing during her free time was looking out the window. She was just gazing at the stars and watching the sudden lights and display of colorful lights dancing high above the sudden hemisphere. She described them as green and beautiful. Jemison also read in space and listened to music by Stevie Wonder, Eaton James, and Aretha Franklin. She wanted to dance to the music, but she was unable to because there was no gravity to hold her down. Instead, she found herself floating around the shutter's cabin. Eventually, she learned that moving around in space can be better controlled by General Public herself for the power shuttle was, holding on the hand grips attached to the walls who also help to control movements. One of Jameson's most enjoyable moments was when she started each of her shuttle mission ships with a famous line from Star Trek, hailing frequently open. The chapter alumni on horror said this whenever the Enterprise tried to communicate with another spaceship. Jemison's friend, actress Nichelle Nicholas, who played Leonard Anhar, asked her to say these words in space. On September 20, 1992, Jemison and her fallen astronauts prepared to return to Earth. That flight on the Endeavour, after 8 days in outer space, was nearing its end. Preparation for re-entry into Earth's atmosphere began the day before the shuttle was scheduled to return. The crew secured anything that had been floating in invaders, zero gravity atmosphere, books, equipment, and other objects were retrieved and sorted away or attached to a safe place. During the space flight, the astronauts had experienced water loss due to the body's epidemics to weightlessness a couple of hours before landing. Jemison and her crewmates drank several glasses of liquid and took salt pills to keep the fluids balanced in their bodies. The astronauts gathered their suits, boots, helmets, and other protective clothing and put them on before the invader landed. The suits they wore during the re-entry are called G-suits. The pants can be inflated to keep the blood from falling on the astronaut's legs. The sudden change for the wireless astronauts to Earth's gravity can cause a sudden flow of blood to the legs and away from the brain. This can cause an astronaut to black out. Once everything was stored and the astronauts were safely in their seats and hooked up to their oxygen, they began to deorbit. The shelter's small engines were fouled to slow the shutting down. About half an hour later, the shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere. Jemison looked out Invail's window to see the glowing orange light surrounding the shuttle. This light was caused by the intense heat gathered by the shuttle speeding through the air as it returned to Earth. If it were not for the protected heat ties on the outside of the shuttle, the spacecraft would have burning up during recently. Seeing the shuttle gliding towards the runway, the commander lowered the landing gear and the shuttle touches down. Innovator was back on Earth. When the mission ended on September 20th, 1992, astronauts Jemison and her fellow crew members had completed 107 orbits on Earth, orbits of Earth. Jemison, in her first space flight, had logged in 190 hours, 30 minutes, and 23 seconds in space. It seems that her time in space was over too fast, but her body felt the effect of the flight. The effects of the flight. Her, her heart rate was faster. Her arms and legs felt heavy, and she had loss of balance. As a physicality, Jemison knew these were normal symptoms of returning to the gallery atmosphere. A doctor arrived aboard the shuttle and checked the astronauts. After a short time, they were allowed to leave the space shuttle. It had been quite a while for Mae Jemison and her following astronauts. The weeks and months that followed her return to Earth were busy ones. Jemison participated in parades, honored her history flight into space. She also made guest appearances and guest speeches during her sixth day. She arrived tribute in Chicago. These activities were planned to celebrate her 36th birthday on October 17, 1992. After the celebration, Jemison returned to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Her name was entered into the pool of astronauts to be selected for the next space shuttle flights. While waiting for another chance to fly into space, Jemison continued doing science fest experiences and other space-related duties. She also kept staying in good physical condition and worked at perfectly her astronaut skills for another opportunity to a bit off. Chapter 5. Life after NASA. In early 1993, Jemison decided to take a leave of absence from NASA. She had been invited to teach a space technology course at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. Jemison's class, entered space age technology in the vulnerable learning countries, was a popular one and attracts many minorities and women. Then in March 1993, Jemison made a permanent career decision. She decided to resign from NASA. Her work as an astronaut had taken up many hours of her time. She had worked 60 hours weeks that had sometimes stretched into 80 hours. When she decided to resign, she had not let being resigning to another space flight. She explained in a magazine interview that she wanted to continue going and was interested in resourcing new advanced technologies, especially for losing third world countries. Although there were some people who thought Jemison was making a mistake by leaving the space program, she experienced that being an astronaut was only one part of her life. She added that she had been honored to be the first African American woman in space, but that there was other contributions she wanted to make to society. Yet, at the age of 17, at the age of 37, Jemison had already accomplished a great deal. Her list of awards were many, including an honorary decoration of letters from Winston-Salem State University in North Carolina, and a honorary decorator of sciences from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. She was even honored in a mural painting by Spencer Taylor, entering Black Americans in flight. She is shown as the first African American woman astronaut. Jemison has always possessed a desire to seek out exciting and new opportunities. She believes it's important to live as a well-balanced life. Although she had previously said she would like to travel into space again, even if some aliens came by and invite me, she was now ready to move on to a different kind of challenge. After leaving NASA, Jemison decided to develop her own company. The Jemison Group Incorporated is a science and technology firm located in Houston, Texas. Her company is small, employing under the 10 people, but it has many experts in different fields available for constitutional purposes. Her goals are as the founder and president of the Jemison Group are to bring advances in technology to developing countries, promote science education, and help people become involved in space exploration. One way advancing technology can help less independent nations is thought the efficient use of solar power. This method can work well in tropical sunny areas. Solar energy can be used in place of fossil fuels, such as oil and coal, which can harm the environment when they were or mineral and buried. These militaries are also difficult to transport into isolated areas. Jemison's company is working on two projects that can improve healthcare in third world countries. There are an electrifying generator, solar disk, and electrified and satellite-based telecommunications system. In order to promote science education, the Jemison Group, with the help of the other companies, sponsors an entertainment international sciences camp called the Earth We Share. The Earth We Share. In July 1994, its first year, 27 students from ages 12 to 17 from the United States, Sweden, Angola, Trinidad, and Sierra Leone, along with teachers and college students, attended the camp. The students spent 4 weeks at Colorado Rosemary Hall, in preschool in Wellington, Connecticut. The 1994 camp was so successful that it was held again in 1995, this time at Camp Algonquin in Algonquin, Illinois. In the summer of 1996, another camp was held at Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama. The official camp teaches sciences through hands-on experiences and creates an applications for the sciences. Topics such as global problems, recycling, space exploration, and environment are tackled by the students. There are courses to use critical thinking skills to better understanding the world around them. Dr. Jamison's life is a busy one. She is single and lives with her cats, Caesar, Mike, and Yellow Mama in Houston, Texas. She also lives in New Hampshire when she is teaching. She is teaching at Storybook College when her business schedule permits. She promotes sciences education by speaking to school groups and hosting television programs that encourage interest in the sciences. In the summer of 1995, Jemison participated in a television program called Susan B. participated in a television program called Susan B. Enters Slept Hill, a program about America Slept Hill, a program about American women who had made their marks in history. Jemison spoke about two women who she considers to be heroes. One was an African American named Maryland C.J. Walker. He developed a cognac line for black women and became the first African American woman millionaire. Jemison stressed that Walker was a humble woman and never took her wealth for granted. She described her as an early advocate of women's independence. The second person that Jemison profiled was Christopher McAfee, the school teacher from Concord, New Hampshire. He died on the space shuttle at Jemison on January the 28th, 1986. She was America's first ordinary citizen to venture to space. Jemison noted she was taken along her son Stephen Frog, her husband's classmate, and a $5 tape. Jemison said she understood why McAfee wanted to go into space, because she had wanted the same thing from a very, very early age. Jemison added, critics of McAfee's dream and hope remain an inspiration. Jemison's believed that opportunities in space and the sciences will be increasing in the 21st century is based on the fact that space study and travel are extraordinary. Is it any wonder that May Jemison sees a bright future for young people interested in exploring the universe? When people ask Jemison how space exploration can help African Americans be more involved in sciences and technology, she says, my collaboration in the space shuttle mission helps to say that all peoples of the world have astronauts, physicists, and explorers. Although Dr. May C. Jemison does not see herself as a role model, but rather as a person of her own personal achievements, she has left her imprints on history. As a physicist, scientist, teacher, businesswoman, and the first African American woman astronaut to travel into space, the future is still wide open to her as she continues to follow her dreams. That's all for the book, and that's the book called Mae Jemison and Space Biography. And I hope you enjoyed this book, and I enjoy reading it. I hope you enjoy listening while reading this book, and I hope you enjoy watching this book as much as I do. So, cause I read it and I enjoy reading it. Please subscribe to this video, and please watch it on YouTube if you're gonna like this book. Tuned in, this is Joseph Curl of My Storybook. Have a great day.